February 8th, 1983, a drainage engineer descends beneath 23 Cranley Gardens, North London. What he discovers blocking the pipes will expose one of Britain's most prolific serial killers, a civil servant who, for 5 years, concealed his crimes in plain sight. But here is what haunts investigators to this very day. Dennis Nilsen did not hunt his victims. He invited them home. And the question nobody wants to answer is, how many accepted that invitation and never left?
I can't understand you. I ask you to start filming from the feet slowly up to the head. You could kill somebody. Listen to that. And you ain't seen nothing yet. Cut.
Dennis Andrew Nilsen. Born November 23, 1945, in Fraserburgh, Scotland. To neighbors, he was unremarkable, a quiet job center employee who walked his dog and kept to himself. But behind that facade lived a man responsible for at least 12 deaths, possibly 15. The exact number? He could not remember.
They asked me how many there were, and I didn't really know. I just gave them a figure. And because I was cooperating with the police, I decided I'll stick with it. You know? There were three of those victims were invented just to complement the continuity of evidence to the police, because then to keep them happy.
Between 1978 and 1983, young men entered his flat, and they simply disappeared. To understand how someone becomes capable of this, we need to go back to a childhood experience so profound it would fundamentally alter his relationship with death itself. I am going to show you something even more disturbing. The psychological pattern that made him almost impossible to stop. 1951. 6-year-old Dennis adores his grandfather, Andrew White, a Norwegian fisherman, and the only stable male figure in his fractured home. Then, one October morning, Andrew dies suddenly of a heart attack. Here is the critical detail. Dennis was not told his grandfather had passed. Instead, his family dressed him in formal clothes and brought him to view the body in the family parlor. Child psychologists call this traumatic bereavement exposure. Nilsen would later describe it as the moment he associated death with profound emotional connection. Now, you might be wondering, how does childhood grief evolve into something so dangerous? The answer involves a psychological condition so rare that forensic psychiatrists still study Nilsen's case in training programs. But before we get there, you need to understand the formative years that followed. 15-year-old Nilsen joins the Army Catering Corps. For 11 years, he learns military discipline and food preparation techniques. He also serves briefly in medical capacities during the Aden conflict, where he encounters deceased individuals. But something else is developing. Nilsen begins photographing himself in mirrors, applying makeup to appear deceased, lying motionless for extended periods.
Making myself look dead, or it was nothing to do with death itself. It was making myself look as different from me as it was possible to imagine, so that I could really be convincing as being somebody else.
Clinical psychologists would later identify this as thanatotic identification, a compulsion to visualize oneself as deceased. And in 1978, that compulsion would manifest in his first act of violence. But the trigger was not rage or a specific incident. It was something far more mundane, and that is what makes it so unsettling. December 30th, 1978. 195 Melrose Avenue, Cricklewood, North London. Dennis Nilsen, now 33, meets 14-year-old Stephen Holmes at a pub. A homeless Irish teenager looking for accommodation. They drink, they talk. Holmes falls asleep, and then Nilsen takes his life using manual strangulation. But here is what forensic interviews revealed. Nilsen did not plan this. He later told detectives, "I didn't want him to leave in the morning. If he stayed, we could continue talking." This was not about violence as an end goal. It was about preventing abandonment. So, he acted. And then, he retained the body for approximately 8 months. What occurred during those 8 months established a pattern he would repeat. The answer involves methods he had learned in military service and a ritual that became his operational signature. But I need to show you the psychiatric evaluation first, because it explains why he could not stop. Dr. Patrick Galway, the forensic psychiatrist assigned to evaluate Nilsen, documented a condition he termed necrophilic homicide syndrome, where the individual values possession of a non-responsive body over the act itself. Nilsen later stated, "I wanted them present, companions who couldn't reject me, because the deceased cannot abandon you."
Necrophilia is sexual attraction or even sexual activity with corpses. One of the biggest motivations for necrophilia is simply to have sexual relations with a non-resisting and a non-rejecting partner. And I think we see that in Nilsen's pattern of behavior, the very fact that he would ply his victims with drugs and alcohol to make them sedated. Another motivation is simply for comfort and to decrease the feeling of isolation.
Between 1978 and 1981, 195 Melrose Avenue becomes the site of at least 11 deaths. Nilsen's methodology crystallizes into a repeatable pattern. Step 1. Approach vulnerable young men, individuals experiencing homelessness, unemployment, or transience. Step 2. Offer food, alcohol, and accommodation. Establish trust. Step 3. Wait until the individual loses consciousness, then proceed with strangulation, either ligature or manual. If they regain consciousness, submersion follows. Step 4. Retain the body in his residence for extended periods, sometimes weeks. Now, you are likely wondering, how did this continue undetected? How did neighbors not report anything unusual? The answer demonstrates a level of planning that separates organized from disorganized offenders. But first, I need to tell you about the men who survived. Carl Stoddard, October 1982. Stoddard regains consciousness in Nilsen's bathtub during an assault. He loses consciousness again. When he awakens on the sofa, Nilsen is performing resuscitation, visibly distressed. Nilsen releases him. Stoddard survives.
Carl Stoddard met Nilsen at the Black Cap, where he agreed to go back to Nilsen's flat.
I fell asleep and I woke up and he was strangling me. And I passed out after sort of thinking. I thought I'd got caught up in the sleeping bag which he had warned me about. And I thought he was helping me out, but he wasn't. And anyway, I passed out from that. And I remember vaguely hearing water running and being carried, and I felt very cold, and I realized I was in the bath and he was trying to drown me.
Paul Nobbs, November 1981. Wakes with visible neck injuries. Nilsen claims it was consensual activity. Nobbs accepts this explanation. These men survived, but the question that haunts them, why them? What made them different? Here is how Nilsen avoided detection. He utilized dismemberment techniques from his army training, separating remains into manageable portions using standard kitchen implements. He then conducted disposal via incineration in his back garden, masking the odor with burning tires and refuse. When neighbors complained about the smell, Nilsen attributed it to municipal waste collection issues. Between 1978 and 1981, at least 11 men die at Melrose Avenue. Then, in October 1981, Nilsen relocates to an attic flat at 23 Cranley Gardens, a building without garden access. And that is when his system fails. At Cranley Gardens, Nilsen cannot continue outdoor disposal, so he adapts. He boils skeletal material in cooking vessels to facilitate tissue separation. The odor becomes overwhelming. He attempts toilet disposal of organic matter and stores remaining material in luggage concealed in his wardrobe. Between 1981 and 1983, 3 more men die at this address: John Howlett, Graham Allen, and Stephen Sinclair, a 20-year-old from Perth, Scotland. But Dennis Nilsen is running out of concealment options. February 1983. Multiple tenants at 23 Cranley Gardens report severe drainage problems. The property landlord contacts Dino Rod Maintenance Services, and on February 8th, engineer Michael Catran opens the external access point to the sewer system. He directs his torch beam into the pipe, and what he observes is not consistent with typical blockages. Catran later testified, the material had a distinctive appearance and texture. It did not match any standard obstruction I had encountered. He contacts authorities. Detective Chief Inspector Peter J. arrives within hours.
I discovered that there were two young ladies living downstairs on the ground floor. The middle floor was empty and the top floor was a fellow called Dennis Nilsen, who came home every night about 5 o'clock. So I decided that we'd wait until he came home. My first introductory words to him were, "I'm Detective Chief Inspector J from Hornsey Police Station. I've come about your drains." And he looked at me and he said, "Well, since when have police been interested in blocked drains?" I said, "Well, you take me up in your flat and I'll tell you." At that very moment, he was fully composed. We went up to his flat and you could smell immediately the decomposing flesh. That was crystal clear as we walked in. I said to him, "Look, your drains were blocked with human remains." And he looked at me and he said, "Oh my God, how awful." And I just pushed my face a little bit nearer to his and said, "Don't mess about. Where's the rest of the body?"
And Dennis Nilsen, with notable calm, replies, "They're in bags in my wardrobe. I'll show you." He leads them to his bedroom, opens the wardrobe. Inside are sealed bags containing separated human remains. Jay asks, "How many individuals are we discussing?" Nilsen pauses. Then he delivers a response that forensic teams are still processing decades later. 15 or 16. I am not entirely certain. Dennis Nilsen had ended so many lives that he genuinely could not provide an accurate count. But here is what forensic excavation of 195 Melrose Avenue revealed. Evidence suggesting potential additional victims. And that raises the question investigators still ask, how many unidentified individuals never received closure?
We have found considerable items of bone this morning and this afternoon.
It appears as though the bodies have been burnt in the back garden before burial.
There's a possibility.
October 24th, 1983. The trial begins at the Old Bailey. Nilsen's defense argues diminished responsibility, that his psychological compulsions rendered him legally unable to control his actions. But the prosecution presents something devastating: Nilsen's personal journals. For years, he documented his thought processes, not just the acts, but the rationalizations. He wrote, "I wished I could cease, but I had no alternative source of fulfillment." He described his victims as a sympathetic presence in an otherwise solitary existence. This was not insanity under the law. This was documented awareness of right and wrong. Remember I promised to explain the psychiatric diagnosis? Here it is. Dr. Patrick Galway concluded Nilsen suffered from severe attachment disorder, rooted in early childhood trauma. His formative experience with death, viewing his deceased grandfather, created an association between affection and mortality. When adult Nilsen experienced fear of rejection, his psychology made a catastrophic connection. Deceased individuals cannot abandon you. But here is the aspect that explains his eventual confession. Dennis Nilsen wanted resolution. In forensic interviews, Nilsen stated, "Each death represented self-directed violence. I was eliminating aspects of myself I recognized in them." He perceived his victims as reflections, young, vulnerable, seeking connection. By ending their lives, he enacted a symbolic self-termination repeatedly. The clinical term is victim identification. It is exceptionally rare in serial homicide cases.
Body in the fantasy. The most exciting part of the little conundrum was when I lifted the body, carried it. It was an expression of my power to lift and carry and have control. And the dangling element of limp limbs was an expression of his passivity.
Yes. So his
these two opposite things. I mean, it was my power and his passivity. The more passive he could be, the more powerful I was.
November 4th, 1983. The jury deliberates for approximately 24 hours. Verdict: guilty on 6 counts of murder, 2 counts of attempted murder. Sentence: life imprisonment, with a minimum recommendation of 25 years. In court, Nilsen displays minimal emotional response. But in his cell, he writes, "I have traversed an abyss." Now there remains only silence. Dennis Nilsen would serve 34 years in custody. Initially at Wormwood Scrubs, later transferred to Full Sutton Maximum Security Facility. He never expressed remorse. Instead, he composed over 6,000 pages of memoirs, continuing to rationalize his actions. But the families of identified victims tell a different story. Stephen Holmes, 14 years old, experiencing homelessness, simply needed shelter. Kenneth Ockenden, 23, Canadian tourist, contacted his family the evening he met Nilsen, mentioning he'd met someone offering accommodation. Martin Duffy, 16, had left home following family difficulties. His mother spent decades searching. These were not statistics. They were sons, brothers, individuals whose lives held value. And because of Nilsen's disposal methods, at least 8 victims remain unidentified. During the 1983 investigation, forensic teams excavated the garden at 195 Melrose Avenue. They recovered over 1,000 fragments of human bone and tissue. The painstaking identification process revealed remains from multiple individuals. But many fragments were too degraded for conclusive identification. At least 8 people who died at Nilsen's hands have never been named. If you're wondering why this case still matters, why we analyze someone who died in 2018, here is the reason. Dennis Nilsen demonstrated that dangerous individuals do not present obvious warning signs. They appear ordinary, helpful even. And his victims? Society had already marginalized them. Housing instability, economic hardship, and social isolation made them invisible. That is the systemic failure, not just the individual crimes, the social conditions that enabled them. May 12, 2018, Full Sutton Prison, Yorkshire. Dennis Nilsen dies from a ruptured abdominal aortic aneurysm at age 72. He had been incarcerated for 34 years, longer than most of his victims lived. His final request regarding his remains was denied by authorities, but the implications of his case continue. Remember that drainage engineer in February 1983? Michael Catron, who made the initial discovery. He gave testimony decades later, and he said something that resonates. It wasn't the physical discovery that affected me most. It was realizing someone had made deliberate choices that led to that moment. That is Nilsen's legacy. Not the acts themselves, but the calculated decisions that preceded them. If you take one insight from this case, let it be this: the most dangerous individuals do not present as threatening. They appear ordinary, helpful even. Nilsen's victims were not naive. They were in difficult circumstances and affect judgment. Currently, the UK has over 271,000 individuals experiencing homelessness. Thousands are young adults. Organizations like Crisis UK, Centrepoint, and Shelter work to address this. If this case prompted reflection, those organizations represent constructive action. Because Dennis Nilsen was not unique in British criminal history. In 1994, another case emerged. An individual responsible for at least 12 deaths concealing remains within his own property's structure. His name was Frederick West. And that case we will examine next time. The drainage system at 23 Cranley Gardens has been replaced. The building remains occupied, but sometimes, according to residents, there is an unexplained odor. Something that does not match typical plumbing issues. Probably just aging infrastructure. Or maybe some things leave permanent traces.
Bodies are all gone. Everything's gone. There is nothing left. But I still feel in a spiritual communion with these people.